Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Gwenda B. Davey, and I'm the chair of the Melbourne group of the Friends of the National Film and Sound Archive. I'm very happy to welcome all of you today, but also particularly to welcome our speaker, Peter Krausz, this afternoon. Peter's a film critic and broadcaster on film with an Australian and international reputation for his work. He has told me that he's borrowed the title of, or he's telling you too, I think, that he's borrowed the title of this talk from Charles Chaplin, My Life in Film, and I feel nothing could be more appropriate. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thanks very much, Gwenda, and hello everyone. And I feel somewhat unworthy to give a presentation about myself to all of you, but it's really appreciated that I can talk about my life in film, so to speak, and some of the interesting journeys I've had along the way, and controversies that I've also been part of, and the controversies are actually very interesting indeed. So. Yes, I borrowed, as Gwenda said, from Charlie Chaplin's biography, My Life in Pictures, I thought, because I suppose my life has been predominantly about pictures, about film, about screen, etc. So let's now talk about it. It's been an interesting history. So how did I become a film buff? I suppose you could put it that way. It all started, I suppose, with my mother, both my parents were Jewish refugees from Europe in 1938, and they fortunately were able to escape in one of the last ships that left Europe before, of course, the Holocaust and the onslaught happened. And the ship meant to sail on to America, and the ship sailed on, so like something from Fellini. And they were supposed to go to America, and unfortunately, America refused to accept a ship full of refugees, as they didn't want to get involved in potential conflict with Germany and with Hitler and Europe, etc. So the ship sailed on, and eventually they ended up in China and landed in Shanghai. And between 1938 and 1947, they lived in Shanghai under the protection of the Chinese government. And so there was a large Jewish enclave of refugees who lived there. So my first thought was I could have been born in China, which would have been very interesting, but that didn't happen. They then went on to, after 47, to Palestine and to, which then became Israel, of course, and then to Austria, but nothing worked, so they decided to come to Australia. And so I was born in Australia. So I'm not Chinese, I'm not American, I'm a Melburnian. And I suppose I make that allusion that when my mother took me to the cinema very early on, the allusion to Terence Davies' film Distant Voices Still Lives, although without the angst, I have to say. But she was the one who probably started off my film career. She'd take me to The Sound of Music and to other films at that time, so you can see how that will date me. And I started to get really interested in cinema. And then when I went to school in Melbourne, German being my first language, I didn't actually start learning English until I went to school. In high school, I went to Melbourne High, if you're interested. Not the greatest of schools, but that's another story. What they did to us every Friday afternoon was to show us a film, especially in year 9 and 10, to keep us quiet. And so, because of course year 9s are always rioting, especially in a boys' school. So, so I would see films like Hamlet and George Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I thought, I love cinema. I'm really enjoying this, and it's much more interesting than schoolwork. So I really start to get intrigued by cinema. And then I, of course, picked up on television and watched TV voraciously, seeing as many films as I could, really enjoying them. Deadly Earnest, some of you may remember, hosted some wonderful horror films, and Hal Todd, oh, there's a blast from the past, who screened lots of European films that were savagely cut or were dubbed. Nevertheless, I enjoyed seeing the films and would always say, stop these 30-minute commercials, Hal, let's get back to the film. But anyway, so that's where it all started, I suppose. So, I mean, I started off my career as a teacher, and in a sense I still am. I still work in a school as my day job as a counsellor. But I taught media and English early on in my career, and I wanted to impart my interest in film to students, and I found that was really interesting to do that. And so I joined ATOM, the Australian Teachers of Media, and shortly afterwards I was on the committee and asked whether I would want to host a 30-minute radio show on 3CR called Media Moves, which the person presenting it was not able to continue. And so I was asked, would I take it over, knowing that I had such a strong interest in film, etc. So that's where my radio career started, on a Tuesday evening at, I think it was 6 o'clock, running a 30-minute media show where I would review films and perhaps have a guest in the studio. And so that's where my broadcasting really took off. So over the 20 years I was with 3CR, which eventually moved my show to a 1-hour slot on a Saturday because they were enjoying it. And so I interviewed so many filmmakers, reviewed everything that was being released, discussed media issues, and it really built up my networking, my contacts, etc., considerably. And so something I very much enjoyed doing, and talking to so many filmmakers, getting behind the scenes about what caused their interest in filmmaking and how did they make those particular films, etc. So I was at 3CR for about 20 years and then left because the station became extremely political, and of course the biggest target of 3CR, of community radio, I think I was right the first time, was that they targeted the male presenters on various shows. They wanted as many women running shows as possible. So I was eventually jettisoned, and so I left the station under somewhat high dudgeon, because I thought I was running a very good show, but obviously I wasn't female. So I then joined 3AK. Now that was an interesting experience in itself with Yvonne Lawrence. Now Yvonne Lawrence ran a Saturday evening show from 10 p.m. to midnight. And she always had someone with her who brought in cakes and so on, but she wanted a film reviewer. And she had heard about me, and she contacted me and asked if I would come in and become her regular film reviewer. So I wandered into the 3AK studios, which was in St Kilda Road at the time, actually, until it moved to Richmond. And I did weekly film reviews. Now, Yvonne Lawrence was a very interesting person to deal with. She loved her audience. She loved getting calls from all of her acolytes who rang up saying, Yvonne, you're wonderful, we love you, and isn't this great, and how are you? And so she would have these long chats with people and give me 3.5 minutes to do a film review, which I thought was hilarious. And she also was not very happy if I reviewed a film that she didn't like, or she hadn't seen, or it was dealing with a topic that might be a little bit too offensive for her audience. So she would cut me off after about a couple of minutes saying, oh, okay, yeah, so that's the film, all right, so if you want to go and see it, you can go and see it. And then she'd go back and take another call from someone else in. Well, I actually found that quite amusing. So I kept up with that for a couple of years, and then I decided I think I needed to move on because I wasn't getting a proper hearing for my film reviews, and so went to, still on 3AK, went to Peter Byrne on a Saturday morning. He ran his own show, and he wanted a regular film reviewer, but he was very conversational. He was great to deal with. So I would go in for an hour and talk about films I'd seen and comments about them. And he was very responsive, even though he hadn't seen most of the films. And so we had a great chat. So that was actually a very pleasant experience. After that time, I've been on other radio stations, 3KND, Indigenous radio. How did I end up on Indigenous radio, being a film reviewer who's not Indigenous? That in itself is not a big story. I was just contacted by the host of a morning show who had heard me on 3CR and on 3AK and said he wanted me to do regular film reviews for him. And I said, fine, happy to do that. So I would ring those in each morning, each weekday morning, with one film each day. And then, and that lasted for a few years. And then, unfortunately, very sadly, he died. And the station decided they didn't want anyone non-Indigenous to be on the show, on any show at all, which is fair enough. I actually understood that. So I went to Sunbury Radio, which is a very odd radio station, but I had my own show and I could use my own title, Movie Metropolis, which I've used ever since for all of the shows that I host, and had a long stint on Sunbury Radio, having a regular Sunday morning slot for an hour talking film. Occasionally ABC would ring me and ask me to do some film reviews overnight. 3 o'clock in the morning was on one occasion, which was wonderful. But again, I enjoyed doing that. And occasionally I did some film reviews with Richard Stubbs when he was on the ABC in Melbourne in the afternoon. And 3AW also contacted me, especially during the Christmas period, because they knew that I'd seen all the films that were being released over Christmas. So I've had a long-standing radio career. Currently I'm on WIN FM, which is based in Werribee at Victoria University, 88.9, and on Apple FM 98.5 on Sunday. So Saturday for WIN FM, Sunday on Apple FM. Both 2-hour shows, slightly different shows, depending on anything new I learn about what's happening in the film industry, but I review everything. Also is Australian cinema in particular. I love Australian cinema and I want to promote that as much as possible. But of course, world cinema is my main interest, as you'll see when I talk about that a bit later on. Now, the war between the film critics, and you thought Russia and Ukraine was a big battle. This is worse. And there are not too many survivors after this one, I think. I'm lucky I'm still standing. When I joined the Melbourne Film Critics Forum in 1990, and it was run at that time by Jane Epstein, a terrific person. She ran this collection of film critics to try and further film criticism amongst Melbourne media and so on. And so this organisation was there to try and promote the quality film reviewing. And there were about 60 of us who were part of the Melbourne Film Critics Forum, which was very enjoyable. But I noticed something, and she had alerted me to this, that the Sydney group, called the Film Critics Circle of Australia, hated the Melbourne film critics with a passion. She had tried on a few occasions to try and merge the two organisations so that there'd be one national group of film critics. She had no success. And eventually, when I became president of the Melbourne Film Critics Forum, I'd had enough because I thought it was ridiculous that the Sydney crowd hated Melbourne with such a passion. So I started talking to a few people on the Film Critics Circle, such as Evan Williams, who was sympathetic, and a few other people. And in particular, what rankled myself and many other Melbourne film critics is that we had no access to FIPRESCI international film juries, FIPRESCI being the International Federation of Film Critics. And they work with each country's Film Critics Association. And if you're not a member of an accredited FIPRESCI Film Critics Association in every country in the world, then you had no access to any international juries. So that, of course, was absolutely ludicrous. And the main criticism that Sydney had of Melbourne is that a number of the Melbourne film critics are not paid for being film critics, even though they're professional critics in a sense that they are well researched and well credentialed, etc. They were not regarded as being professional because they're not being paid regularly to be film critics. Of course, we know now that most film critics aren't paid because most organisations like The Age and the Herald Sun might have one national film critic or two, but there's very few opportunities for paid employment as a film critic. Anyway, so with that in mind, and that I knew the head of FIPRESCI, Krausz, in my travels along the way, I contacted him and asked him whether the Melbourne film critics could become members. And he said, of course they can. Who said you can't? I said, well, the Sydney group have said that because they regarded Melbourne film critics as being the rump of not being well-paid critics, then they were not eligible. He said that is absolutely ridiculous. In Germany, he said, where he's based, Krausz, half the film critics are not paid, and they are still eligible to be members of the German Film Critics Association and to be eligible for international film juries. So he gave me some advice and I took some action because I was continually being rebuffed by Sydney, and in particular, surprisingly, Margaret Pomerantz and David Stratton, who regarded Melbourne film critics as not being worthy of being regarded as being eligible for membership for FIPRESCI or for the FCCA. Well, I just saw red after that, and I took it upon myself to change the name of the Melbourne Film Critics Forum to the Australian Film Critics Association, because it had to be a nationally registered group of film critics, and contacted FIPRESCI and submitted an application to be a member, a film critic group member of FIPRESCI, so that all of the Melbourne critics would have access, if they wanted to any international film juries. That was accepted without question, and now Australia has two national film critics associations, one based in Sydney, one based in Melbourne. We don't talk to one another. They hate us with a passion. They hate me even more for having taken the step of having the Melbourne critics registered with FIPRESCI. And so the battle rages, and the bloodshed is quite incredible. Anyway, I mean, obviously I'm talking figuratively, but there is no bloodshed, but it shows you how the Sydney-Melbourne rivalry has extended to the two Film Critics Association. It's a very powerful rivalry, and it's very sad, but that's what it is. So a big victory for Melbourne film critics, and now we, since about 2000, we've had access to international juries. It's interesting, the FCCA approached me and said, if you stop trying to get national accreditation and FIPRESCI registration, we will let you be a member of the FCCA, and then you can have access to FIPRESCI juries. And I said, this is not about me, this is about Melbourne film critics. And so I flatly refused, which they were not happy about, because ultimately we had the victory. Okay, Krausz even visited Australia in 2001 to try and get the two organisations to talk to one another and resolve it, because he does not want more than one National Film Critics Association in each country to be registered with FIPRESCI. And I said, absolutely. So I met with Krausz, happy to meet. The Sydney group refused to meet and point blank refused to meet with Krausz. They will not talk about anything, especially not with the Melbourne group being represented. And so he just flew back to Germany and immediately told the FIPRESCI board group, that the board members, that we have to have two organisations in Australia. In fact, there are 6 countries where there are 2 film critic associations registered with FIPRESCI. I can't remember all of them. I know Germany is one of them. I think Norway might be another, Slovenia, can't remember, and there's a couple of others. Anyway, so battle stations are formed, Melbourne won. Now, and just to show you the schism continues, it's quite interesting to note that Sydney charges, and I'm prepared to be quite open about this, its members $225 a year for membership so that they can have access to FIPRESCI jury. In Melbourne, all the Melbourne film critics are charged $75 for the same access and the same membership card to allow access into cinemas. So I think Sydney will be regretting to this day what they're doing. But that's them.
Peter,
yes.
Just one little interruption for clarification.
Please.
Just explain what access to the International Film Jury actually is and what it involves.
Okay, no, that's a good question. What happens is FIPRESCI publishes to each member organisation around the world a list of upcoming film festivals that require a FIPRESCI International Film Critics Jury. And so there are about 100 film festivals around the world, starting probably with the Berlinale, the Berlin Film Festival, and then of course Cannes and Toronto and Sundance. I mean, there's a whole raft of film festivals, none in Australia, by the way, in which case that's another story. I can't get any film festival in Australia to have a FIPRESCI jury, because that would give them international recognition. But it's expensive, because the film festival has to pay for the 3 to 5 jury members who are flown in from around the world to be on this international jury. So it just means that everyone gets a list from the National Association for each country of upcoming film festivals, and then they apply to be on the jury. And so what happens is, centrally in Munich, which is where the base is of FIPRESCI, they look at each application. Generally they're approved, but with the countries that have more than one member association, like Australia, then if say a member of the FCCA and a member of AFCA apply to be on the same jury, then FIPRESCI has the right to determine which of those 2 organisations will have the applicant's successful membership of that jury. I also tried to get a heads of agreement with the FCCA, so that at least, even if we still functioned as separate organisations, we would still work together to put forward a common candidate for any particular film juries, assuming that more than one person wanted to apply, and they refused that as well. So does that hopefully explain the role? Yeah. It's an interesting process. I've now been on 3 FIPRESCI juries, and that's it's a great experience. I'll talk about that. And so just to reiterate the importance of FIPRESCI, it gives national or international recognition to a film festival. But why film festivals, some don't have a FIPRESCI jury, is because they want to determine who can be on the jury. And Fipresci says, no, it is not up to the film festival to determine, it's up to Fipresci to determine who's on the jury. And in Australia, there is that sort of arrogance that most of the film festivals have, saying that, no, A, the Fipresci jury is too expensive, B, we want to appoint our own juries, and C, we don't see the need for one. Well, that is very sad. We have had one that I'm aware of because I made sure it happened in Adelaide. So I'll get to that in a moment. All right, so Fipresci determines that usually there's 3 to 5 people on a jury, minimum is 3, and in the Berlinale they have 12 because there are 4 separate juries for each of the categories that they use. But it is expensive, I have to say, because the film festivals pay for travel, and it's very rare for a Southern Hemisphere film critic to be able to get a Guernsey on a Northern Hemisphere film jury, Fipresci film jury, because of the costs involved. And I mean, yes, you can pay your own way, but that also is very expensive. So it can be very difficult for anyone south of the equator to get onto most of the festivals, which happen to be north of the equator. All right, so moving along, the International Federation of Film Critics, I've been on 3 international juries. I established the one in Adelaide because I spoke to the, at that time, just before 2007, to the head of the film festival at that time, and that happened to be Katrina Sedgwick, who is now the head of ACME in Melbourne. So she was head of the Adelaide Film Festival at the time, and she actually was interested in having a Fipresci jury. She thought it would add something to the festival, give it international coverage, and so she agreed to have a jury. And what happened was the jury was made up of 3 people, not of the 2 photos you see there, but of 3 people, one from Russia. I should contact him and ask him what his thinking is at the moment, and one from France. And so they were flown in. Of course, I wasn't as expensive. I was just coming in from Melbourne, but I was the first Australian member of an international film jury, which was great credit to Fipresci for allowing this to happen and for the Adelaide Film Festival. And so I worked with the 2 of them, and they were terrific people to work with. Every jury around the world has to operate in English. So that's a requirement if you're going to any other country where English is not the main language. You can't be admitted onto the jury unless you can communicate in English. The pictures that you see on the screen now are when I was invited to be on the Munich Film Festival jury. Krausz contacted me and asked me to put in an application to be at the Munich Film Festival. And he also said there was a Sydney applicant as well. And he said he is going to dismiss the Sydney applicant and wanted me to be on the jury, which I thought was very flattering. And he said, no, I deserved that because of the work that I've been doing in terms of Fipresci in Australia and the fight against the Sydney crowd. So on the huge cinema in Munich at the opening night, they flashed that picture of the jury, and I worked with a Norwegian and a Polish film critic, Jan and Andre. And in the photo on the right, you can see Jan is standing behind me on my left, and on the extreme left is Andre from Poland. Krausz, the head of Fipresci, is in the center of the screen, and that's the assistant who worked with him to look after us, because we were very well looked after in Munich. I have to say, it was a terrific experience. We were ferried everywhere. They fed us. We had free accommodation for the 8 days of the festival. And the three of us got on like a house on fire. They knew nothing or very little about Australia, and that Australian film critics knew anything about Europe and about international cinema. So they were astounded by me, and that I could speak German, and that I knew so much about world cinema as well. They knew very little about Australian cinema, so I taught them a fair bit about Australian cinema, films they should look at, and so on. So that was just a wonderful experience, I have to say. So there is, so I mentioned I worked with a French and Russian film critic in Adelaide. Adelaide decided to not continue with the Fipresci jury. It did cost them a fair bit to fly in the French and Russian film critics and to put them up for a week, etc. And so because the Adelaide Film Festival was only run every 2 years, they thought maybe it's not so important, and they gave up on it after that one occasion, which is a great shame. Anyway, moving along, the Munich Film Festival is the second largest film festival in Germany, run in June and July, over 8 days, late June, early July. The two people who run the film festival are there on the left, and they are just wonderful people to deal with. And they were astounded that an Australian film critic would be so interested in being on the Fipresci jury in Munich, and that was the first time that an Australian had been involved. So I had nice long chats to them, and we had a lot of fun talking about Down Under and Australian cinema. And on the right, you can see the photo of the Fipresci Award that we presented. They're standing between Jan and Andre is Eva Torbisch. She's the director of the film that we gave the Fipresci Award to. The award is for the best first-time director of a German film. Her film was an incredible film. All is Well is the, All is Good is the English translation, and it's such a prescient topic when I was there in 2018 about a woman who is raped in an office environment by a colleague, and she decides not to say anything about it. And that spins her emotional life and her life in general out of control until quite a shattering conclusion. An incredibly prescient film. Because Andre and Jan's English was adequate but not good enough to write the reason why that film was given the Fipresci Award, I was asked to write it, which was very nice, to write the statement, and then I went on stage in front of a packed Munich Film Festival audience to present the award with Jan and Andre to Eva for the best Fipresci film. So that was such a great experience, and Munich is such a beautiful city, and I really enjoyed myself. I've been there several times now. Before I was on the jury, and once afterwards, till we were not allowed to travel anymore. And yeah, so that's basically a summary of what I just stated. Yes, I'm still in contact with both of the two jurors who I worked with at Munich, and they're just terrific people. And yeah, okay, what can I say? Now, and last year I was invited to be on the Berlinale, which of course was not held in person. It was held online as a virtual jury. And again, I was the only Southern Hemisphere person to be invited onto the jury. So I worked with, as you can see, a number of other jurors. We were split up into the 4 categories for the Berlinale: panorama, international encounters, and documentary. And I was on the panorama section. And we saw, I think, and the films that are in that section are the ones that the Berlinale placed in there for us. And so each jury had to see about 15 films, if I remember correctly. And then we had to give a prize. Each jury had to give a prize for each of those sections. But the winner is a film called Brothers Keeper from Turkey, an incredible film about the mistreatment in a Turkish boarding school of Romanian immigrants, and especially of the young kids who were treated quite badly. A really incredible film. Interesting enough, it's just played at the Europa Film Festival in Melbourne and Sydney. So I was pleased to see that film got a Guernsey. It won't get a commercial release. It might end up on streaming somewhere, but who knows. Okay, moving along. So with Forgetting for Presky now, I set up with ACME a while ago now, a number of years ago, a regular monthly Australian film screening, which would be paired with a discussion panel, which would be run by AFCA, and I chaired that. And so we run films like Demonstrator, like They're a Weird Mob, and several other Australian films from the National Film and Sound Archive, or held at ACME or elsewhere. And we would have a discussion. So we'd have maybe 40, 50 people turn up, and we might have a filmmaker involved, and a few other people who knew the film quite well, wanted to discuss it. And so that was a great setup that we had with ACME quite a while ago, but obviously now ACME don't want anything to do with that, which I won't explore any further. I'm advisor on many film festivals, Polish, Jewish, German, and Tasmanian. So I might recommend some films that I've seen at various film festivals, or online, or whatever that I might have seen as a premiere, which might be worth screening at those festivals. And in particular, I've worked with the German Film Festival in Australia. I work with the Goethe Institute. And so each year I will be part of the film selection process, and then run the discussions with filmmakers at many of the screenings, introduce many of the films. And that was a great opportunity to mix with audiences. Not only Germans went to the German Film Festival in Australia that Palace Cinemas would run, or at least host, not run. A lot of Australian audiences wanted to see good new German films that deserved also discussion afterwards, or whatever, like the Baader-Meinhof complex and so on. Then in Goethe Institute's infinite wisdom, they decided to give up on the German Film Festival, much to my chagrin, annoyance, disgust, pick an adjective. And so in 2017, with the gap that was going to happen until 2018, when Palace Cinemas would be taking over the German Film Festival and running it completely themselves, as they run a number of film festivals. I was the artistic director of something run just in Melbourne called German Cinema Melbourne. I selected 11 films that I'd seen at Munich, or I'd seen in my travels, that I knew about, or that filmmakers had contacted me about, including the Australian premiere of a film called Fritz Lang, how appropriate, which was a fairly recent biographical film about the filmmaker, and in particular focusing on one event that caused him to be influenced into making particular films. So anyway, so that was a great experience, I must say. I was program manager for BOFA for a year in 2019, where I selected many of the films, wrote the synopses, hosted screenings, Q&As, etc. Always great talking to filmmakers. And I do that for distributors and filmmakers from time to time. when I'm asked to host a Q&A. And there was a publication that came out, I think it was 2006, called 100 Greatest Films of Australian Cinema. And many film critics were approached to write at least one detailed article on the 100 films that were selected by the editorial board. Obviously, you can argue about, first of all, the selections that they made, but nevertheless, leaving that to one side, I was actually asked to write 3 detailed articles for that publication, which I know is out of print, but is available at the National Library. And also, I've seen it pop up on eBay. There are copies that people are trying to sell. I think the last one I saw, they were trying to sell for $45. I think originally it was published at $30. It was a coffee table book, and 100 films were there. I mean, most of the major films were there. And they're the 3 I wrote on Caddy, For the Term of His Natural Life, the silent film, and They're a Weird Mob. And they were all 1,000-word articles. So it was, when you opened the book, there was the 1,000-word article on the left and a photo from the film on the right-hand side. You wouldn't call it a massively academic journal or record of 100 films, but nevertheless, there was such a raft of people who wrote for it. Bill Collins and David Stratton and so many other people wrote 2 or 3 film reviews or film reports for those 100 films. So it's worth getting a hold of. It's if you can. It's an interesting publication, but it's not Senses of Cinema where you get that detailed, in-depth, subtextual analysis of films. Although I tried to do that with the 3 films that I wrote in terms of that publication. Now, just before I talk about the Melbourne Catholic controversy, I should also mention the Indonesian Film Festival. And I think Gaston in Indonesia is part of this this discussion or this presentation that I'm doing. And Gaston is such an important figure in Indonesian cinema, in film commentary, etc. And he had been involved with the Indonesian Film Festival. I was involved with the Indonesian, I still am actually, with the Indonesian Film Festival for the last 8 years. And what happens is each year, that film festival is run by a group of students from Melbourne University who take it as a project, and so it rotates every year as a different group of students, as a project to run the Indonesian Film Festival. So, as you can imagine, it is not a professional film festival. It is run with, shall we say, on the smell of an oily rag. And it's, so what has happened, I'm trying to be kind to them. What has happened is that each year I've given each group of students who run the festival advice. How to run a film festival, as I'm now pretty experienced in how to run a festival, what to do, how to publicize it, what films perhaps they should be looking at, how critics should be approached to publicize the event. And of course, they ignore me. So each year, each group of students, they don't learn from the previous years. They listen to my advice each year, note it all down and tell me, no, we can't do that. We can't hire publicists. We can't accept your film recommendations as they're too expensive. We have to get what we're offered. We can't have really big guests, but although they do try and have a filmmaker guest for each film that is run, usually it's about 5 or 6 films. This year it's only going to be 3, and it will be run at ACME in April. Indonesian film industry may not be a major industry, but it's an important one, and a lot of films are produced there. And I think what the students are doing is to downplay what is such an important cultural identity as Indonesian cinema. And I know Gaston, who's listening to this, will probably say, yes, they're absolutely right. Let's keep promoting and understanding Indonesian cinema and work together with Australia. But the students don't really do that. It doesn't really happen properly. Still, it's been great being involved with the Indonesian Film Festival and talking to Indonesian filmmakers. This year, there'll be 3 films only screened at ACME, and there'll be a filmmaker or an actor attached by Zoom to each film, and I'll be talking to each of them. Now, the Melbourne Catholic. What an interesting publication. That was established as a magazine, as a glossy magazine, about 10 years ago. And I was asked to be the film critic for the Melbourne Catholic. Now, of course, I'm not Catholic, and they know that, and that didn't faze them. And I said, what if I review films that may be a little controversial, or maybe a little upsetting, or may even not so much question Catholic doctrine, but might be a little bit dubious. I said, go for it, go for your life. So each month, I should say, I reviewed 4 films, about 500 words for each film. And the first film I reviewed, and it didn't faze them, was Spotlight, which was the film, as you may be aware, about the American priests who were involved in a pedophile ring. That was just coming to the fore at the time, and Spotlight, the film, revealed all that. I thought they're not going to accept this review because, hey, it's the Melbourne Catholic, and we don't want to denigrate what Catholic priests do. They had no problem publishing my review. Anyway, that publication is now defunct, so I was given carte blanche. I couldn't use 4-letter words, not that I would use that in a review anyway. And anything religiously problematic, I just had to have a little warning in the review, but really there was nothing of any major issue until I reviewed Call Me By Your Name. I was very positive about the film. It is a terrific film, but yes, it is problematic in the sense that it was released around the time when in Australia, and of course it was happening around the world, the Catholic priests were under some scrutiny for their pedophile issues that were being raised. The Melbourne Catholic accepted my review. They had no problem with it, published it, and then a bishop objected to my review and wanted me immediately banned or excommunicated, or which was very difficult because I'm Jewish, so I suppose you can't excommunicate someone who's not Catholic. Anyway, his criticism of my review was picked up by the Australian. And so the Australian ran an article saying a Melbourne Catholic dares to publish a review which presents homosexuality without being critical of homosexuality, of being positive about a film. And not only that, the bishop said, I was actually reviewing a film that encouraged grooming. Now, if you know the film, you know that is not the case. There was no grooming going on. If anything, it was the Timothy Chalamet character who was grooming Armie Hammer. But anyway, that's another story, and we won't talk about Armie Hammer, I suppose, because he's in his own trouble at this stage. So the Melbourne Catholic supported me, and the issue then died down very quickly, but a storm in a teacup, as they say. But the Catholic Church, or that bishop certainly, was very sensitive to what the pedophile priests were getting up to, and they were worried that, he was worried that my review was encouraging it. Dear, oh dear. You never know what can happen when you review a film. So anyway, as I said, the editors of the Melbourne Catholic supported me. There was no problem. They just asked me in future, until the magazine was closed, just to alert any people that I was reviewing something that may be offensive to some Catholic readers. Dear, oh dear. All right. I've mentioned I've been involved in many other film juries. for the Australian Film Institute and then ACTA, especially before they changed the system. I was on the pre-selection jury for the documentary award at the AFI ACTA, which was very enjoyable, seeing about 50 films, and that had to be whittled down amongst a group of 8 of us to about 4 or 5 nominees. I've been on the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival jury as well as working with them, Science Fiction Film Festival. As you can see, my interests are very diverse. And as I've mentioned, the Indonesian Film Festival, which, yeah, it needs to be run professionally, but at the moment there's no organisation. I've tried with an outside organisation in Indonesia to see if they were prepared to run the Indonesian Film Festival as a professional event with Australian advisors, including myself, but they think it's too problematic, might be too expensive. They're not sure if there's an audience. Well, what can you do? All right. Melbourne International Film Festival. I love being involved in controversy. And so when the Melbourne Film Festival decided that they were going to not screen a film that they had selected initially, and in 2020, of course, MIFF was online, it was not in cinemas. The Austrian film, The Trouble with Being Born, directed by Sandra Vollner, who I subsequently interviewed, then I just read about that censorship. And this is where David Stratton and I were united. Surprisingly, you know, he didn't think a Melbourne film critic was, in this case, was the rump and not worthy of being involved in something. So I contacted The Age and protested. The Age reported that the reason the film was banned was 2 psychologists, and intriguing enough, I'm a psychologist as well, so we won't go into that. 2 psychologists were referred to seeing the film because they, for some reason, the director of MIFF, the artistic director, got a little bit antsy about showing the film because it was going to be online, and it had had a little bit of controversy overseas in Europe when it was released, and they were worried that children could be watching this film. Now, if you haven't seen the film, it's set in the immediate future, and it's about a man, an adult who's quite lonely, doesn't have any family, and so he is able to get an android to be his sort of child, his offspring. But in a sense, that offspring was also regarded as a sexual object. So it's a very controversial film, but there was nothing explicit in the film. The film has been screened in just about everywhere, and it has been released now in Australia without cuts, etc. But MIFF decided to withdraw the film based on the 30 minutes that those 2 psychologists had seen of the film. What a wonderful way to decide whether a film should be banned or not. So I just objected to that fully. I in fact contacted Sandra in Austria and interviewed her and talked to her about this, and she was astounded that MIFF had decided to withdraw the film, and I had a really interesting chat with her. But The Age then published an article where I was quoted being very critical of the censorship that MIFF had displayed, and MIFF, of course, being a film festival that prides itself on not practicing any censorship, on showing films that would not normally be seen in any other way because of the exemption of classification that film festivals receive, and that it was just untenable for a film to be withdrawn on the spurious basis of what 2 psychologists had said. So that was published in The Age, and in fact on the next screen there's the article. So if you ever want to look at that published article where I'm quoted, David and a few other people are quoted as well, protesting vociferously about how this was just absolutely ludicrous, and so on. And you can see in my direct quotes, absolutely disgusting case of censorship. Decision should be overturned immediately. Someone selected the film first painting material by this ridiculous decision, which flies in the face of freedom from censorship of film festivals. Became a storm in a teacup as well. I mean, the film wasn't screened at MIFF, they kept it out, but only a few weeks later, the film was given a classification and it was released in selected cinemas. So I suppose that that stopped that from becoming a huge issue. So if you ever get a chance to see The Trouble with Being Born, I'm not sure what streaming platform it's on, but it's definitely worth seeing and discussing, but not to have it banned from MIFF. That was just ridiculous. Now, as another side to my interesting film life, I suppose it's interesting, is that I've been at the Logie Awards when they were held in Melbourne for over 10 years. I was actually part of the media scrum. So I represented radio, my radio station at the time, and did some red carpet interviews. So Paddy Newton and Hazel Phillips and others who I'd met a few times would come over to me and have a brief chat about what was happening in their worlds, etc., which was very enjoyable, I must say, although standing up at Crown for about 2 hours, because the TV with Logie Awards are pre-recorded, and so they were always run in the afternoon and then held until the evening when they were actually screened. Then I was in the media room and asked some sensible questions of the Logie winners who were ferried in there to face the media. So I didn't ask the usual stupid question like, and what does it feel like to win a Logie? Gee, it must have been wonderful. No, I actually asked something more insightful because I would know the television productions or a bit about the actor perhaps, or the producer or whatever who had won the Logie, and so I would ask something a little bit more incisive. And what it meant was, hilariously, is that the answers that were given were always published in the various newspapers and magazines, but I was never acknowledged as the person who was asking the appropriate question. As I say there in my comment there, show business, you wouldn't want to be in it. All right. Now, so I've had the great fortune being in Munich a number of times, in particular, as well as in Australia when we've had guests come to Australia to interview some really interesting people. Quentin Tarantino was great to interview, especially because he does his research before he allows any journalist or broadcaster to interview him. So he already knew about me before I got the okay to talk to him when he was in Melbourne. And secondly, I asked him questions that none of the other people asked him. I mean, he was here for the film The Hateful Eight at the time. And I would approach it by asking him questions that no one else would ask him, such as, what was it like working with Ennio Morricone, who composed the film score for the film? And he, you asked me a great question. And he would then wax effusive about working with Morricone and how he developed the musical score and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so I always try and ask questions, or when I interview filmmakers, of questions that they may not get in the run-of-the-mill sort of film journalist who would ask the usual questions. Anyway, Michel Legrand, was great to meet him. Such a terrific music composer, Umbrellas of Cherbourg and so on. Brian Cox, when he was here in Melbourne, talking about Churchill. Ray Fine, when he was here talking about the film that he directed. Jeffrey Rush, Emma Thompson, who I met at the Munich Film Festival. She was an absolute delight. Margareta von Trotter, who did that fantastic film on Hannah Arendt. Maren Ade, Mandelplummer, and so on. Michel Hazanavicius, that name may not ring a bell. Met him in Munich. He directed The Artist, that silent black and white film, tribute to silent cinema, which was a great film. And I spoke to him about his more recent film, and various other people. And I've spoken to Sue so many times, Sue Maslin, and met Jesse Eisenberg and talked to him at Munich opening night. So it's been a privilege actually to meet so many interesting people in my travels. And more recently, I was invited to become a member of the Society of Australian Cinema Pioneers, which tends to have as its members, and I think, Ray, you're a member, it tends to have members who are worked in the film industry considerably, perhaps working in distribution or in projection or in various other components of the film industry, but they have not really promoted it to film critics being members of the Cinema Pioneers. So they said no, they wanted more film critics like myself to be involved. So there I am as a member. Now, one of my big delights in visiting Berlin a number of times while when I was at the Munich Film Festival, I would always then visit Berlin, lovely city, wonderful place, is I'd visit Studio Babelsberg. And it's a shame I can't share this 4-minute promotional video, unfortunately, which is encrypted, and so I can't really share it. And it won't sort of register on my computer. I don't understand why, but don't worry. It's a quick 4-minute promotion of Studio Babelsberg, which is the oldest continuously existing film studio in the world. It was established in 1912. This month, it's celebrating its 110th anniversary. And I've been now to Studio Baldwinsburg 3 times to speak to the head of the studio, to talk about how Australia could, or producers could be involved in co-productions, working with Studio Baldwinsburg. It has 21 massive sound studios, and many of the films that you see being presented in Australia are co-productions between America and Studio Baldwinsburg and other countries. You'd be surprised how many films have been shot at Studio Baldwinsburg or produced there. And again, he was astounded, the head of the studio, about Australia's interest in German cinema, my interest, and about seeking co-productions from Australia, which they haven't had. But they're hoping that something might happen. And I've spoken to a few film producers about that. And I'm hoping in Australia, hoping that something might eventuate very soon. For example, a film that was shot at Studio Baldwinsburg is Uncharted, a film that is now on cinema screens across Australia. Most of it was shot at Studio Baldwinsburg, and you'd be astounded how many films have actually been made there. It's an incredible place. And yes, that's where I'm standing outside the Marlene Dietrich Hall, or the sound studio, one of the 21 sound studios there. And the head of the studio said, "You've got to have a photo taken in front of the Marlene Dietrich sound studio." I said, "Yeah, of course." And on the right is a picture of the entrance to the studio. It's a huge complex, and adjoining it is this theme park. So you can experience all sorts of special effects and other sets and all sorts of other things from films that have been made, such as this massive prop that was used in The Never-Ending Story, if you know that film at all. So yes, visiting Baldwinsburg studio on 3 occasions has been a real highlight of my film career. And Berlin is a vibrant city. On the left there is the Reichstag building, the Cupola, which is used as the basis for my Zoom background screen whenever I do interviews. It's just an absolutely fascinating place to visit and to walk around and to see the history of Germany when you walk around in the photos that are in there, but also to go inside and see where Angela Merkel used to run the government, etc. It's a really fascinating place to visit and full of history, of course, because it was bombed, and the Russians then did so much to it to ruin it, and then it was rebuilt. And anyway, enough of that. My favorite cinema in Berlin is Babylon. This is an independent cinema that runs films from around the world. They have occasionally had Australian films screened there, as well as other films from around the world. And they have seasons. Here they had a Hitchcock season of films. It is an absolutely brilliant. So if you're ever in Berlin, once we're allowed to travel again, I think we probably are now, Babylon, which is right in the middle of Berlin, is just a wonderful place to visit and see films in a most unusual 5-screen environment. And finally, just a few more photos. There's a picture of me with the director of the film, The Art of Self-Defense, and to my left, Jesse Eisenberg. And we had a terrific chat about not just that film, but he wanted to talk about what was Jewish life like in Australia. And I thought that came out of left field. He obviously knew I was Jewish. And so I had a nice little off-air chat about that with him. Maybe he was considering visiting, or he had a girlfriend at the time who was Jewish or something, but he's Jewish himself. So I don't know. He was just intrigued by Australia and why an Australian was at the Munich Film Festival. That intrigued lots of people at Munich, I must assure you. And on the right is that incredible monument to the Holocaust, which was set up in Berlin. All of these slabs of different heights in a sort of a 1 kilometer radius. It is the most amazing experience to walk through that, and for Berlin to have that memorial there to commemorate that heinous period of the Holocaust. So I suppose there's my my snapshot of my life in film, and the controversies and all sorts of things I've been involved with. And to me, it sounds as if I'm being very self-indulgent because I'm talking about myself and everything I've been involved with and so on. But hopefully it's been of interest to everyone, and I'm very happy to answer any questions or to, you know, whatever you'd like to ask me about anything that I've revealed in this journey. Thank you.
Gwenda, you're talking, but now you're muted.
Now, thank you very much, Peter. That was absolutely fascinating. And I'm so glad you came and did talk about yourself, because that was what was, you know, so extremely interesting for all of us. And what an object lesson it is, Peter, for the value of immigrants to migrants and refugees to Australia. You know, look what your family brought here, and you have contributed, and how marvellous it is that, you know, the links can be made, you know, with countries overseas. So anyway, thank you again for that. Now, Pete, Bruce, have we got many questions or comments on the chat room? Or?
There've been some comments of appreciation, but there haven't actually been any questions. So I might ask if anyone's got a question. There's enough of us. I can see everybody on the one screen. So I think just maybe unmute and ask your question or say your comment if you've got one. So I'll just open it up. And Ray's got one.
Peter, I just was interested in your comment about you being the only Australian that's ever, you know, brought into these things. This is a phenomenon, because it's true in the world of film archiving as well, that the world exists north, you know, the Northern Hemisphere, and we have to make the effort to put our hand up and get it. And so we're always, you know, very in the minority, or even regarded as rather exotic, you know, coming from the south. It's why I guess we often try to, again, gravitate to activity in Asia, where we're geographically closer to what goes on. But your experience is very similar to mine in the film archiving world, where where we in the southern hemisphere are somewhat rarities.
Yes, which is a shame. Yeah.
And on what Ray just said, then I was quite distressed to hear that it's not just north of the equator; that's north of the Murray River. I thought that was bad news. That's still happening. It's a cultural cringe.
It is, Graham. You would be astounded. I've held back on some of the comments that were made by some of the Sydney film critics about Melbourne film critics being lacking knowledge, lacking experience, lacking the ability to have professional voices in terms of reviewing film. It astounded me so greatly. And when I contacted Krausz at Frepresky about this, he said, yes, I've found the same thing. When he came to Australia to try and talk to the Sydney people, even he wanted to talk to them by themselves without me being there. I said, go for it, do whatever you want. They refused to talk to him. And it was just absolutely amazing, the schism between Sydney and Melbourne. And anyway, so they're the losers in the long run.
It is extraordinary. I did notice, however, Peter, you did conduct an interview at the Sydney Film Festival with the makers of this new great doco, the one John Harrow, Hollywood's Man in the Shadows. So that was at the Sydney Film Festival. Did you manage to crack the sound barrier?
You'd be surprised. The film festivals are not an issue. I can get interviews from any film festival around the world, and Sydney, they love it when I ask to talk to various people. They give me lots of interviews and so on. So the Sydney Film Festival is not an issue. It's just the Film Critics Circle of Australia. That's the issue. So yeah, the cringe is with them, not with Sydney Film Festival.
Good to hear.
If I may bring my little experience of having come to Australia at the age of 13 in 1960, I have always been absolutely a very, very much a devotee of film. And thank you, Peter, for most charming life that you had. As far as I'm concerned, I relate very much to the refugee situation because I happen to be a grandmother for refugees. And that is, it's now sort of taken a bit of a political bent because of the upcoming election. But and just to say that, you know, I really was very interested in your comment with call me by your name. Look, it was just a wonderful experience to listen to you, Peter. So thank you ever so much.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. That's very nice of you.
I hope we meet one day.
That'd be nice.
If ever you're up in the Dandenongs, I'm in Montrose, and I have a lovely little, tiny little, I call it an artistic retreat with a beautiful view of the King Lake Range. So you can come and have a cuppa in my gazebo anytime.
Well, if somehow you can get me your email or contact details, I'd be very happy to take you up on your offer.
Well, we'll definitely have to call. Yeah, that is most possible.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have sneakily offline asked Gaston if he would like to just say something briefly about the Indonesian Film Festival from his perspective, and he's agreed to do so. So the floor is yours for a sec, Gaston.
Great.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Great presentation. Hi,
Gaston.
Yeah, it's still 11:30 here. So it's great to be able to meet Peter again, although it's just from the podcast. But I'm very happy, and I miss so much about our conversations back then in Acne. Yeah, I'm here in Surabaya, in East Java province. Yeah, I know Peter Krausz the first time when he was asked by the IFF, Indonesian Film Festival Committee, to host the Q&A sections during the festival. And that was great because he actually interviewed some great Indonesian filmmaker at that time. Yeah, and I was so grateful to Peter because through his questions and insightful comments, then I got some new perspective of Indonesian's movies. Yeah, and I think during that time, by having Peter Krausz in that film festival, I think the quality of IFF was much better, yeah, because we have such famous film critic, from Australia, and I also talked to filmmaker friends in Indonesia in the industry that although it's not run professionally, at least Indonesian Film Festival run by Melbourne University is known by Peter Krausz, a well-known film critic. So we should be happy with that. And of course, although I also suggest some inputs to students, of course they have their own agenda, so it's their project. Yeah, I was just part of a jury in the short film sections. Yeah, that was begun, I think, in 2012. Yeah, by the way, that Indonesian Film Festival has been organized since 2003.
I'm interested to see how the people who have been elected know about it. But
they might do exactly what they did the whole time, feeling good about being elected.
Oh, you're being interrupted, Gaston.
So it's good to see those Indonesian festivals still running until now, although it has get an impact. It was affected deeply by COVID, so they only have online screening, and that the number of the films that they screen also reduced. But we always I was considered senior by those younger students, so I always push them, encourage them that this film festival has to be kind of medium for cultural exchange, particularly, and have as many Australian as many possible to watch the film. And we have also several Australian who became juries in the short film section as well. And we hope it's still rolling for longer years, although for many reasons they always ups and down for the film festival. And again, we should thank Peter for this.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gaston. We're approaching 3:30. We can keep going a bit longer, but I just wanted to invite anyone else, if they have any questions or comments, please give them.
Can I ask one, Bruce? Pete, do you want to elaborate on the ACMI monthly thing, or do you not want to talk about that? I'm just wondering why they would stop a monthly viewing of an Australian film.
Look, they've had a huge turnover of various people who are involved in the film programming and and administration there at ACMI. And at the time, they were very interested in partnerships with organisations like Australian Film Critics Association, with the NFSA, etc. They were very keen to promote Australian films in a monthly screening. But I suppose different people have come in. They want to run it themselves rather than have partner organisations involved. They want to have different focuses. They don't necessarily want to have these regular in-person events if only 40 or 50 people show up. So look, there's a whole raft of reasons why ACMI decided to stop it, which was a great shame. But you'd have to talk to the current administration of ACMI, which is very much more interior in terms of the way it's looking at things at the moment. And so they have 2 or 3 programmers that run everything. They have very few in-person Q&A events or discussions. They tend to go more towards film series or film events, mini film festivals, that sort of thing, and individual film screenings, anything that it's much easier to present. And of course, we now know that ACMI is closed again for another month because the Cinematheque was not able to resume there because the sound panelling that was put into the 2 cinemas has decided to flake off. And so they have to put the sound panels back. I was speaking to the head of the Melbourne Cinematheque a few days ago, and I said to him, "Does that mean the blue tack has worn off?"
Well, that's a statement on the funding, isn't
it? And he said, "I'm not allowed to say that." I said, "That's okay, I said it." So hopefully once the blue tack, maybe it's green tack now they're using, works, the ACMI will be able to reopen later in March.
Yeah, right.
Peter, I was fascinated by the conversation about professional and paid critics and so on, and I won't let us go back down that rabbit hole now, but I do have one question that sort of relates to that, and that is, in your opinion, has the role of the film critic changed now in the world of social media and sort of aggregator critic sites like Rotten Tomatoes and so on? Has that changed the way that you go about what you do as a film critic?
Look, absolutely has changed considerably. I mean, this has been part of a discussion that I've been involved with Fapresky on an international level. And this has happened across the board around the world. There are outlets are not so much interested in having multiple film reviewers, paid film reviewers, so they've cut back on that. Because of the rise of the blogosphere and of influencers, whatever the hell that means, who can give an instant review, which is obviously much more important than an informed film critic's view, and blogs, etc. And I mean, and yes, that lack of payment, that in fact 2/3 of the members of the Sydney Film Critics Circle of Australia are not paid film reviewers either. Hypocrites that they are. Anyway, but moving along, the not demise, but the diminution of the role of the film critic, especially a paid film critic, with expertise and knowledge and so on, has been diminished considerably, and that's very sad. And to this day, and even though I've tried to establish one at Melbourne University, some sort of diploma of film criticism, something that would credential the role and perhaps give it more currency, Melbourne University keep walking away from that, saying, "Oh, it's a good idea, but I don't think it's going to work." And of course, the reason they give is that they don't think enough people will be interested, and that there are relatively fewer paid film reviewing jobs, even though there's lots of very good film reviewers who are not paid, of course. Like myself, I don't get paid for any of the film reviews I do. Apart from the Melbourne Catholic, I was paid to present my reviews, and I thought that was interesting that they would pay for me being critical of the Catholic Church. But hey, who can comment on that? But anyway, but yes, there's relatively fewer opportunities for film critics. So, and there's no direct career path for film critics. I mean, film critics come from different walks of life, although having a love and knowledge of film is, I suppose, one of the main issues, but you don't necessarily study for that. Yeah, I think so, Bruce. That's the real problem.
Yep. Thanks, Peter. Anyone else have any last questions?
I can make a statement about that and say how ridiculous I think it is after 30 years myself. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
When Margaret and David have evolved as well. I mean, how many people are involved in the brick wall? I mean, you know, Dave and Margaret are obviously the ones that are most prominent, but how many other people are involved in that brick wall?
You mean how many members are there in the two film critics associations?
Oh no, the ones, mainly just the Sydney ones, who were just being stalwarts and not.
Oh, well, yeah, it's relatively many of them. There were very few supporters of having some sort of agreement between Sydney and Melbourne. They wanted to remain individual. They also argued they were the first national Australian Film Critics Association, which is true. And then they say, we are the only national Film Critics Association. And of course, that's ludicrous, because they would not accept any Melbourne members, apart from them trying to co-opt me. So the brick wall is very strong still, and I don't see any possibility of any accord between the two organisations, even though I've reached out a few times, but they have never reached out to us. So it's just crazy, absolutely crazy. And why David and Margaret are so against having some sort of agreement with Melbourne film critics is still beyond me. And I don't know, I just put it down to a bit of arrogance, I suppose, more than anything else, and that Sydney-Melbourne rivalry. But other people might need to pursue that one, because I'm obviously too close to it.
You know, if I run into her, I'll mention that to her.
Okay. Go for it.
Yeah, well, as you know, she's a director of the AFI now, so you know, I have a chance to run into her occasionally.
Okay. Ask the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I mean,
yep.
It's just ludicrous after 30 years. You can understand at the start, oh, everyone's all this rubbish, but I mean,
yep.
Anyway.
Okay, just to finish on what may be a more positive note, I've got one last question for you, Peter, and it may be impossible to answer, but how many films, well, two parts. The first part is easy, the second part's hard. The first is, how many films would you watch in the average week? And the second part is, how many have you seen in your lifetime? Ballpark figure.
I think I need, is it Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory to do a mathematical calculation for me? Well, look.
And that's not a sneaky way of working out your age.
Look, I'm 67, all right? Leave me alone. Stop hounding me. I had enough from David and Margaret. No, anyway. Look, I would say roughly, because if we're talking about in-cinema previews as well as screener links that are sent to me for films that are about to be released, I would say on average 7 to 10 films a week. So, and depends on the week. Some weeks would be closer to 10, some weeks would be closer to 7. Depending on how many films are released. So when I jot down every film that I see, I don't write reviews, I extemporize, but on radio. But knowing that, I see around about 500 films a year. And that also doesn't necessarily include films that I might see at the various film festivals, which are not released in cinemas, but they're separate, so I can review festivals on my radio shows, etc. But yeah, look, if we put a baseline to about 500 films a year, about 10 a week, roughly, and over my lifetime, since I started watching films in 1969, that was when it really started properly, I suppose, 70. Oh my goodness, I don't dare want to do the maths.
No, we'll let everyone do the maths themselves. They can do your homework.
Too many is the answer.
Alternatively, a lot.
Yes. Exactly, a lot.
I think we should throw over to you, Gwenda, to close.
Yes. Well, it's a great pleasure to thank you, Peter. This has been a most enjoyable afternoon and instructive and enjoyable. Thank you very, very much for doing it. Apologies to everybody for all the technical problems we had at first, some of which were my making, some of which were just, you know, chance. And thank you very much to Bruce Watson for handling the tech side of things. And Peter, once again, from most valuable and interesting talk. And it has been recorded, anybody who wants to watch it again or knows somebody who's missed it, you can find it on the Friends of the NFSA website. So thank you again, Peter.
Thank you so much, Gwenda, Bruce and Gaston and everyone. I appreciate it and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Hey, mate.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks.
Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you.